Welcome to the Temple of the Silver Stars public webinar. My name is Matthew. I'm an academic track instructor in the Temple of the Silver Star. And Temple of the Silver Star is a modern mystery school. We offer structured training in ceremonial magic, astrology, Kabbalah, and tarot, a number of other interrelated subjects in both our academic and our initiatory tracks. And if you're interested in learning more about Temple of the Silver Star, I'll give you some contact information and some resources for learning more at the end of the class today. So this is the second part of our four-part series on titled Sacred Numbers, Words of Power. And so last time, 2 weeks ago, we looked at just some of the really foundational principles and some of the core tools for analyzing both words and numbers in a Kabbalistic and kind of Pythagorean manner. 2 weeks ago, we just kind of laid out our tools and sort of set out the different techniques and things like that, and give you a very simple basic demonstration of how each one of them worked, and just set up some of the principles and themes and concepts that we'll be using. So now that we have a basic orientation to our tools, now it's time to start actually putting those tools into practice. So in this class and our next class, these two classes are really the core kind of meat of the class. We'll be actually taking those tools that we've now been introduced to and learning to build some basic, simple structures. So before we get right into it, I just wanted to follow up. Someone at the end of last class had asked about a Hebrew lexicon, and I mentioned this website, BibleHub.com. And then I was thinking about it, and this is actually a really good resource. So I just wanted to again recommend to everyone this website. I think it's a great resource. Everything is searchable, and it has, I think, really all the tools that you're going to need for doing research about Hebrew as well as the Greek from the New Testament as well. It does include, someone was asking about a lexicon, and I was saying, I don't usually use the lexicon, but actually the sort of lexicon feature is really integrated into, so I actually use it more than I was sort of thinking of myself using it. It's really integrated with a lot of the other tools, integrated in with the concordances, with the interlinear Bible. So, just checking out this website and getting some familiarity with how it works, because you can, in switching, learning how everything is connected together and how to use the tool. Now, there's a bunch of tools here. This website's obviously designed for people who actually are Christians. So a lot of the commentaries and some of the sermons and things like that probably aren't going to be particularly relevant for most people here. I mean, they might be interesting, but just access to the text, the fact that you can switch between all the different major translations. In the screenshot I've got there, you can see all the NIV, New International Version, NLT, New Living Tradition. New Living Translation, those are all the major translations. And then you can have parallel text. We can look at a single verse, and all the different translations of the different versions of that. You can use the Strong's, that's the concordance, and it's all searchable. Everything's really hyperlinked. And you can use the interlinear as well. That's where you'll have the English and the Hebrew together, and so you can see exactly which Hebrew word is being translated as which English word, and the lexicon features there as well. So it's a great place to just go around and just kind of start clicking around on things and figuring out how it works. I think it's a really great resource, and it's totally free. Actually buying a Hebrew lexicon and an interlinear Bible and all those other features, is going to be expensive, but you get all those tools here in a searchable, interlinked way. That I think is really useful. So thanks to whoever it was that asked that question last week. I hadn't thought to recommend that, but there you go. It's a great tool. All right, so let's just get into our subject for today. So before we jump right into it, like I often do, which wanted to start with some kind of broader, sort of philosophical, spiritual kind of considerations before we get into the just the nitty gritty of actually analyzing numbers here. So I just wanted to pause for a moment and not do anything really extensive, but just reflect a little bit about the nature of numbers and the nature of mathematics and how we understand those things, and especially how we understand those things as practicing Kabbalists and as magicians. So first of all, you can talk a little bit about the kind of just bring up some of the philosophical considerations involved with number. So I'd say the ontology and epistemology here, right? So the ontology here would be of asking about what numbers actually are, right? And you can take, as many like modern philosophers do, you take number as in a purely like nominalist way. They say that number doesn't really, there's nothing actually in the world outside of our heads that corresponds to number, right? That number is just a tool that humans invented, and we can do a lot of useful things with it, but it's just a thing that we invented. And all the truths of mathematics, they just follow from our own formal systems, the laws that we lay down. Whereas, from a Pythagorean or a Platonic and an esoteric point of view, like number is an actual thing that exists, not physically. It can manifest physically, but it exists above the physical, and in a realm of actual eternal truth. And so if it does exist in a non-physical realm of eternal truth, we can also ask, how it is that we come to know that. An empirical approach here, would say that it's only through our interaction with the world, with our senses, with actually sort of using number in some sort of practical way, that we can learn about the properties of numbers. Whereas a more like Platonist or Pythagorean approach would be that the human mind or the human soul actually has access to this realm of non-physical truth, and that through the practice and study of mathematics, we can actually come into contact with these non-physical truths. We can actually have a relationship to this realm of number that exists beyond our own, beyond humans' creation of the specific systems of mathematics and those formal systems. So I just encourage you to think about that. And if you're interested in this question, there's a lot of resources and everything like that you can look into. And I just think it's something, if you're going to do this, I think it's worth, if you're going to practice. Don't necessarily have to work out all these ideas before you start the practice, and I encourage you not to do that, but just to have something in the back of your mind, and maybe to dig more into as you go deeper into this art, and thinking about what the actual implications are, both for the nature of the world, the nature of the human soul, and other questions like that. All right, and then the second bullet point up here, Phusis and Apollo. So just kind of putting it under the heading of these two Greek deities, right? Phusis is the goddess of nature, and then Apollo, among a lot of other attributes, is the god of music, and by extension the god of mathematics, right? Anciently, music and mathematics are so deeply linked together, in the study of harmony and proportion and all that. And so the Pythagoras and the Pythagoreans, they believed that number, and that this was one of their really the central teaching of everything. When people talk about the Pythagorean tradition and Pythagoreanism, the only thing that's really common, or so-called Neo-Pythagoreanism, the only thing that's really common throughout that tradition is this idea that somehow number is at the core, is at the basis of reality. That number forms the foundation for the actual physical world of the senses that we live in. There's a deeper truth there, which is number and the nature of number. Now, this is not. Let's see. This is sort of controversial. Throughout the history of philosophy, Aristotle did not believe this. Right? Aristotle thought that that there was no way that you could mathematical formulas could just to describe physics. Right? Physics being the study of nature. Right, and so the Aristotelian traditions thought that things move because of the well, I don't want to get too into the details, but because of the elements that they're composed of, that each one just has a kind of proper motion of its own, and that's why things fall when you let go of them, and that there could never be a mathematical formula that could express that. And so this continues to be a philosophical debate for thousands of years, and then it's really with Newton and of course all the other mathematicians and astronomers who come before Newton. It's really the Arabic and Indian mathematicians and astronomers who fully mathematicize astronomy, right? The ability to actually fully express in number the motions of the planets and all that. And then Newton kind of completes that work and comes up with classical mechanics, right? An actual mathematical physics that describes the motions of the world, the motions of objects, in terms of number. And so we could really see, Newton. Of course, Newton is often understood as one of the kind of heralds of modern science and everything. Newton himself was a deeply interested in esotericism. He wrote more about alchemy than he did about physics. He was deeply involved in like numerological study, especially of the Book of Revelation, and trying to predict the date for the end of the world, which I believe is 2050, so or maybe 2051, something like that. But it's only about 20 years away. I don't know. We'll find out if Newton was correct on that one. But my point here is that we can really see Newton as a kind of like fulfillment of that Pythagorean teaching. And so now that's kind of accepted without question, that we can use mathematical formulas to describe the physical world. But that was really a very open question for a very long time. And I think it's significant and worth reflecting that Newton in some sense proved Pythagoras right, at least on that idea that there is something deeply mathematical about the physical world. And then moving on from Newton, from classical mechanics to Einstein and to quantum mechanics, we find that actually our ability to describe and model nature mathematically, and to talk about the mathematical properties of nature, actually exceeds our ability to understand nature itself. I mean, some relativistic effects, and then especially when you get into like the quantum world, there's things that like we know that the equations, or some of them anyways, but what exactly that means in like human terms is totally unknown and possibly unknowable. So that just sort of progression about thinking about how mathematics relates to the physical world, I think is really worth reflecting on. And the way that we sort of frame and understand that progression from a modern point of view. But I think it's really relevant to what we're doing here. The idea that number is deeply linked to the structure of reality itself, both in some sort of kind of transcendental, non-temporal realm, as well as manifest here in the actual impermanent physical world that we live in, is a significant thing. Another thing to consider here, and we'll see this a little bit as we talk about things today, is the history of mathematics itself. The Greeks, the Pythagoreans, and the Greeks in general, not only were there just a lot of mathematical things that they hadn't developed yet, but there's also some mathematical concepts and principles that they were really resistant to developing. The Greeks had a very deep anxiety about infinity and also about zero. They didn't like the idea that either zero or infinity were true, mathematical concepts. The Pythagoreans famously didn't really dislike irrational numbers, right? The classical Pythagorean teachings was that all that number that we find in the world, it's all in the nature of ratio, right? So that everything can be understood as these kind of harmonic proportions and ratios. And there's actually even a story, which may or may not be true, about someone, a Pythagorean member, who discovered that if you have a right triangle with two short sides, unit 1, the hypotenuse will be the square root of 2, right, which is an irrational number, right, not expressible as a ratio. And the Pythagoreans were deeply uncomfortable about this, and apparently he revealed this to like a non-Pythagorean initiate and was drowned. They murdered him because of this secret. Again, it may not actually be a true story, but it at least illustrates the deep anxiety about irrational numbers, about infinity, about zero, and about all these other sorts of things. So that if we are going to be kind of Pythagoreans, in our own right, it's going to be a very different sort of Pythagoreanism, because our mathematics are different. A lot of the things that the Greeks were resistant to, we're not resistant to those things anymore. And you can see that in Crowley. Crowley really uses both the zero and the infinity in his own numerology and Gematria, and we'll see both of those numbers today. And I just think that's worth reflecting on, the way that kind of our modern practice of these things is related to our developing understanding of mathematics. And then finally, again, just coming back to this idea of what mathematics on an esoteric plane looks like, right? I mean, just because you can do mathematical physics works, that doesn't mean that all this kind of symbolic properties of number here are necessarily like the case. But all the way back to the Pythagoreans, there's often been secret and initiated traditions of number, and the idea that numbers have, in addition to their kind of obvious manifest properties, what you can learn in a physics class or something. You also have these deeper kind of esoteric principles within number, and that number has significance beyond just the ability to do calculations. And something about the structure of mathematics, it speaks to deep truths and interrelates with a lot of other aspects of our lives and the world soul and other ideas like that. So again, that's more than enough, I think, about that before we jump into our topic today. But I just wanted to encourage you to to keep some of these really big kind of historical, philosophical, metaphysical principles, in the back of your mind as you study these things. Because they are significant, and they do influence, these types of questions do influence the way that we actually do these things in practice and the way we understand what it is that we're doing. All right, so for the rest of the class here today, we're just going to go through a sequence of, I don't know, about 40-something numbers in numerical order, starting with 0 and then just counting upwards. And so with these numbers, going through these numbers, I have kind of two goals in mind. One is to actually introduce you to some of the most important, some of the core numbers that you'll find in the Golden Dawn and the Thelemic traditions. Not every single one. There's more than we can possibly do in the span of this class. Some are just sort of complex or have other elements to them that I just didn't want or didn't have time to be able to fully explain. So it's definitely not a complete list. And there's something subjective too. The numbers that I consider to be the core, most central importance, will have certainly a lot of overlap with what another Kabbalist will, but they probably won't be exactly identical. So just know that this isn't complete and full. And with some numbers and some concepts and things like that, some of them touch on things that I can't really talk about publicly and things like that. And there's a few things here that I maybe find interesting myself. For the most part, I've left out my own researches and just tried to give you just a grounding in the core of the tradition here, the way that people have been practicing for the last 130 years or so, so that you can start from there and then develop your own principles from there. And then the second thing, besides just the numbers themselves and getting grounded with that, those numbers, and again, I think we can talk about this again at the end about researching your own numbers and doing your own work. I think it's really helpful to kind of imagine it like a map or something like that. That we're learning the territory that's already been sort of well documented and well covered. Now, there's lots of details. There's lots more things to discover about all of these numbers that we're going to be talking about today. But you can also use that as a starting point for branching off and to find other numbers, that maybe are connected to numbers that have already been known and documented, and then you can just extend the boundaries extend the frontiers, of our Kabbalistic knowledge from that point. But then the second thing I really want you to pay attention to in this class here is just the techniques that we're using and the type of thinking that's happening. Just trying to see some of the logic that's at work here, the way we think about things, the way these techniques get employed, and that sort of thing too. So part of it's also just a kind of demonstration of how this stuff works, besides just being knowledge, for its own sake. All right, so so let's just jump right into it here. So starting from 0, and again, this is one of our modern things, right? The Pythagoreans didn't consider 0 to be a number, but we do, and Crowley in Crowley's work especially, like the 0 is made very important, and it's identified with with the Ayin, the not, the kind of the god of negative theology, the non-existence that is prior to to any sort of creation, the ineffable, the beyond, and I think as a metaphysical principle, Crowley really thinks that starting from 0 makes a lot of sense, or makes a lot more sense than starting from 1. That 1 is kind of already positing something. There's something kind of arbitrary almost about starting with 1, and that 0 is actually the logical place to begin thinking about like the creation and the nature of reality and all that. And of course, that's again another sort of modern mathematics thing, right? Is starting from 0 rather than 1. It's actually some jokes about mathematicians, counting, going 0, 1, 2, right, and right, because that's actually a very modern mathematical way of thinking, is that you always start from 0 rather than from 1. So anyways, right, so 0, we're understanding this is the not, the non-existent, again, the divinity of negative theology, the primordial void, and again, this word ayin in Hebrew, meaning not, which itself sums to 61, which is an important number that we'll see in a few minutes. Yeah, this is our kind of kind of cosmological, theological, whatever starting principle here. And now the formula that you see there below the line, there's 0 equals 2. This is one of the core kind of metaphysical formulas within Crowley's thought and within Thelema. And the idea here is that 0 equals 2 expresses the creation, right? So from that 0, that primordial void, the dyad, the world, difference by the binary categories emerge out of that 0. So the way that this works in Crowley's sort of thinking about it is that the dyad here is expressed as the opposite forces of 1 and -1. And so the kind of math we've got here, you see 1 plus -1 equals 0. And then what's happening below that line here is that's saying the cardinality of the set of 1 and -1. Cardinality is of a set just as like how many members it has. How big the set is, right? So the set of 1 and -1 has 2 members, right? So it has a cardinality of 2. But those two things, when added together, equals 0. So the idea is that like reality itself kind of sums to 0. Like when you add everything up, there's nothing, but that nothing has somehow become divided into opposite pairs, which is an interesting thing to think about in terms of like quantum mechanics. You have these ideas of like kind of particle-antiparticle pairs that just emerge out of nothing, and then most cases, just immediately annihilate, rejoin and become nothing again. But the idea that like 1 and -1 can just spontaneously emerge out of the void is something that we're actually discovering is physically true. And again, this is the idea of creation, the idea of multiplicity and separate things emerging out of this primordial night. And then finally, just a quote from the Book of the Law that relates to this concept here about 0 and 2. In chapter 1, and this is of course Nuit speaking to the priest here, and she says, "None breathe the light, faint and fairy of the stars, and 2. For I am divided for love's sake, for the chance of union." Right, so that idea of the division of the 0, and then also the reunification. And so where 0 equals 2 is the formula of creation, in a little bit we'll see a kind of opposite or sort of reverse formula about going from the 2 back to the 0. That won't be, it'll be a little bit different than just 2 equals 0. We'll get to that in a minute. All right, so I don't want to spend a ton of time with the first 10 numbers, the numbers 1 through 10. I went through, really, you could plug in basically everything you know about the Sephiroth, that whole Garments of the Infinite series that I did about a year ago. You could kind of plug all of that in at this point here. Especially the second class, I went through some of the kind of classical, like Pythagorean, what's called an arithmology, which is like a study of the numbers from 1 through 10 and unpacking all their esoteric and kind of philosophical and then mythological and all that, so all those significances of those numbers. And so the numbers 1 through 10, I was sort of thinking about them as they're a bit like, they are to the study of what we're doing here, a bit like what the planets are in astrology, where they're kind of like the alpha and omega. So that if you're, when you start studying astrology, well, other than a very, very brief introduction, you start with the planets, right? It's just like, okay, what does the sun mean? What does the moon mean? What does Venus mean? Right, and so on. And you just have to get a basic understanding of what each planet symbolizes. And then you can start looking at, okay, the signs, which are ruled by the planets, the way that the planets interact with the houses or rule the houses, the aspects that relate the planets to each other and all that sort of stuff, right? The planets are the basics, and then you build up to more complex concepts. But, at least in my own experience and my own observations of talking to and listening to astrologers, in the end, becoming a really good astrologer is a lot about just having a very deep understanding of the planets, right? That you learn all those concepts, but then you kind of come back to just a core understanding of how those planetary, like archetypes or powers or whatever you want to think of them as, how those actually manifest in people's lives in the world, on their own, as well as in relationship to each other. And so I think the same thing is true here. We have to start from a very basic conception of the numbers 1 through 10, but the study of the numbers 1 through 10 sort of goes on and on and on. And a lot of the really deep, I think, work of this is just getting a really deep understanding of these 10 numbers. All right, so the one, in Pythagorean terms, is the monad, and it's just the one. Now, for the Pythagoreans, this is the original principle. There's nothing before this, although we, understand the zero to be before the monad. Corresponds to the Sefer Kether. Aleph, in the alphabet has the value of 1, and so you can bring in everything you know about Kether, everything you know about the letter Aleph, and that can all inform your understanding of the monad. And then some basic significations here. I said, unity, source, identity, and the Godhead. And then I'll come back to Zeus in a few minutes because it relates to something a little bit later. And then for the, again, this is definitely not a complete list, just some basic, what I thought were some of the basic concepts here. And then with the symbols here, there's lots of other symbols, that I could have chosen. I just chose some basic ones, just to add kind of one more dimension to this talk here. All right, and then the 2, the dyad. Now, I've written the math here as 1 plus 1. It's more like 1 reflected is the way that we can understand how the 2 emerges from the 1. This is something actually that Crowley kind of thinks of too, is that if you have the 1 is like the idea of identity, right, and the idea of self. But as soon as you have the idea of self, this self only really means something if there's a non-self. So kind of as soon as you have self or identity, you also have non-self or something that you're not, identified with. And as soon as in self and non-self, that's a dyad, right? So kind of as soon as you have the 1, you also have the 2, which we can think of as like the lightning flash on the tree. As soon as you have Kether, you have all the other 9 Sephirah just sort of immediately, instantaneously, or really like atemporally, like manifest themselves. So as soon as you have 1, you kind of get all the other numbers as well. And that's I think how we can think of that here. And then the letter Beth, in the Magician of the Tarot, I think that as I think I talked about that a little bit 2 weeks ago. That's all very relevant to this as well. And a lot of the symbolism of the magician and the creation of the illusion of duality and all that is really relevant here. And yeah, basic significant difference, duality, all polarities and binaries, these are all related to the number 2. And then just, thinking about like binaries, that's something that people talk about, especially in terms of gender and sex, the idea of binaries. And so it's worth thinking about the idea that that's, this is just one number out of a lot of other numbers, right? The 2 or the binary logic here is just one logic among a number of others. It's not the complete total. And having some of this kind of esoteric understanding of number can be interesting for thinking about issues that we see just through in our culture. And the symbol I've used here is that for 2 there, that's the symbol of from astrology, the opposition. Right, and you have that idea of opposites that kind of that pull against each other, right? There's something difficult about binaries. These opposite things that kind of pull in opposite directions, right? There's almost the suggestion of conflict here, or something that is difficult to resolve between the 2. But then we see that resolved in the 3, in the triad. And the triad, is derived from 1 plus 2. You have the monad and the dyad. If you look at both of those things together, the monad and the dyad, that's 3. So this is Binah, Gimel. All divine trinities can be related to the triad, of course, both like trinities of deities, like Horus like Isis, Osiris, and Horus, as well as like philosophical trinities, which all of those trinities of divine persons, as well as like philosophical trinities, that all precedes the Christian ideas of trinities. Christians get that out from like pagan philosophical thinking, right? So you have like the Platonian trinity of the one, the nous, the divine mind, and then the principle of soul, right? That's like a triad existing within the one, in Plotinus's thought. And so all those sort of ideas are all here. Father, mother, child, all of those trinity ideas are here. The alchemical triad, salt, sulfur, mercury. And then I've written here, reconciliation or return to one. You can see the triad as is sort of the third element that reconciles between those polarities or those binaries, and then also returns them to one. The idea that the binaries in uniting or sort of overcoming the apparent binary, you return to the one. The 4, the tetrad. Now I've written it as 2 times 2. Of course, this is also 2 plus 2 is exactly the same thing. And that fact itself is interesting. That 2, both multiplied by itself and added to itself gives you the same number. 4, Hesed, Daleth. This is, of course, the Tetragrammaton, the 4-lettered name that we'll talk about a lot more. The 4 elements, fire, earth, air, and water. Now, some of the other sort of significations here, we have the idea of law, both coming from the Tetragrammaton, from the elements, from Hesed, and the fact that it's like the dyad extended, and we have that idea of like the demiurge, not the original, primordial creator of existence itself, but the fashioner of particular things and particular forms, which we can also say with Hesed, which is the the highest Sephira below the abyss, right? And in actuality, below the abyss, we've started to emerge into the abyss, or above the abyss, we have like the ideal or potential. And then below the abyss with the 4, we start to emerge into actuality. I've given the symbol there of an equal armed cross. That's how I tend to think of the 4, though a square would work as well here. All right, then we have the pentad, the 5, which is 2 plus 3. Now, the Pythagoreans didn't consider 1 to really even be a true number. Which maybe seems odd, but if you kind of think about it, you can't really count to 1 or like count one object, right? It's not until 2, in some sense, that you really have like the concept of counting or of like enumerating, right? So it's a little counterintuitive from our way of thinking, but they didn't consider the monad to be a true number. But 2 was the idea of the first even number, and then 3 was the first odd number. And so the even numbers are associated with the feminine and the odd with the masculine. That's something I talked about more in the second class in the Garments of the Infinite series about it's called the Pythagorean table of opposites that Aristotle transmits. But anyways, the 2, right, as the first feminine number, and then the 3 as the first masculine number, added together give you the pentad. So the idea here is the 5 or the pentad is like a hermaphroditic number, combining the male and the female. Gevra, Mars, the letter He. Now, some basic significations here. We have the elements plus spirit, which is what the pentagram symbolizes, the 5-pointed star, the 4 elements, crowned with spirit, or spirit as their unity and source. Also, the microcosm, right? The human body, the head, and the 4 limbs, is like the pentagram, and so the pentagram is a symbol of the microcosm, and the number 5 is as well. And then, the letter He, which has a value of 5, it is one of the extremely important, most important letters in our Kabbalah. By sound is the life breath. So we get that here too. The hexad, the 6, is 2 times 3. Tefereth, vow. This is the macrocosm. It can symbolize harmony, right? Tefereth, it even means harmony. And also marriage of the 3 plus 3, which we see like right in the symbol of the hexagram, especially in our way of thinking about the hexagram as like the upward pointing fire triangle united with the downward pointing water triangle. It's like the marriage of those 2 opposites and their harmonious, balanced integration. Now, the 7, the heptad, is really interesting. It doesn't emerge. You cannot. There's no operation of using just the numbers like 2 and 3 that can produce the 7. So the idea here, and I've got the name Athena there in red, and so she emerges out of the forehead of Zeus, who's the monad. So the idea is that the heptad, the 7, emerges directly from the monad. It's not produced by the 2 and 3. In some sense, the heptad doesn't have a mother and father, but just emerges directly from the divine unity. And so the 7, it symbolizes perfection and that sort of divine like completeness and totality. It's not composite. Now, for some purposes, it's interesting to think of 7 as like 3 plus 4 or as 6 plus 1, but we also have this idea too of the heptad that just emerges directly from the monad. Now, of course, the 7, 7 is an extremely important number. It's the 7 planets and a lot of other things associated with that. The 7 days of the week, the 7 metals, and so on and so on. All those groups of 7 are really important here. As the 7 days of the week, especially when we think about with Genesis, we have the 7 days of creation, right? So the period of creation is 7 days. So 7 is a creative number as well. And then 7 is also an extremely important number in the Book of Revelation. You have, well, besides Babylon, the 7-lettered name, the beast has 7 heads, but there's also lots of other 7s, the 7 lamps before the throne, the 7 spirits of God, the 7 seals. There's several groups of 7 angels. There's the lamb with 7 eyes and 7 horns. Like 7 is a really important key number in Revelation, and both Babylon and the beast, of course, come from Revelation, so we get that as well. Then the octad, also known as the Ogdoad, is the 8, which is 2 to the 3rd, 2 times 2 times 2. Symbolizes, intellect, by virtue of Hod, Mercury. Because of its evenness, it was kind of classically thought to represent justice, right? Because it divides into 2 equal 4s. Those divide into 2 equal 2. Each one of those divides into 2 equal 2s, and then that divides into 1s. So it's a kind of like perfect, balanced number. So they thought of it as justice. And then it also gets the symbolism of regeneration because it's beyond the 7, right? So if the 7 is the creation, then the 8 is like the return, back to the first day of creation. So if the 7 is generation, then 8 is regeneration. 8 is also a really important number in what's called the Ogdoadic tradition, like Melita Denning and Osborne Phillips, who are really important contemporary authors on magic, and they really go a lot into the symbolism of the 8, and they call their tradition the Ogdoadic tradition. So if you're interested in the number 8, their work has a lot to say about that. All right, then we have the Ennead, the 9, 3 times 3, or 3 squared, corresponds with Yesod, Teth in the Hebrew alphabet. And now 9 as kind of the highest of the numerals has some of the symbolism of completion or of like a horizon. It's like the furthest out we can get before we start to like loop back around to the beginning again. Now, multiples of 9 always sum to 9, right? So 9 times 2 is 18, 1 plus 8 is 9, 9 times 3 is 27, 2 plus 7 is 9. And this works for any multiple of 9. The digits will always reduce to 9. You can also take any multiple of 9. You can rearrange the orders of the digits and get another multiple of 9. So one of the lessons here is that change is stability. And this, relates to some of the symbolism of Yesod as well. That no matter what you sort of do to the 9, symbolically speaking, you still have the 9, even though it also changes and varies. And then the symbol I used here for the 9 was like a triad of triads. 3 threes or 3 triads is 9, and that's a lot of the symbol. You can think of the 3 triads, on the tree, right? Basically everything but Malkuth. You have the broken down into 3 triads of 3 Sephiroth, one on the middle pillar, or one on each pillar, basically, right? A pair of opposites, and then the reconciliation, and then that sort of multiplied by 3. Then finally, we have the decad, the 10, which is different than the other numbers. Instead of being produced by 2 and 3, the decad is the sum of 1 to 4. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10. So this is Malkuth, also Yod. Interesting, Yod, is 10, but it also represents like the beginning of unity too. And 1 plus 0 reduces to 1. So we have this idea of like the return to the 1, or that we can think of like Kether is in Malkuth as Malkuth is in Kether is a really common Kabbalistic formula, and we can see that right here in the kind of equivalence of 10 and 1. 4 equals 10. I've written here, and again, this is the idea of like the 1 plus 2 plus 4 equals 10, or the Pythagorean tetractys, and that's what I've got in the symbol there is, right? So you've got 4 lines of 1, 2, 3, and 4 dots with 10 total. So this symbolizes manifestation, perfection, totality. And then again, 10 can be reduced to 1. So it's like the idea that we've looped back to the monad with the 10. So it also implies a return to the source. All right, so that was, again, just a really brief overview of all this, some of our basic vocabulary, but there's so much more here that you can go into. And again, you can go and check out the Garments of the Infinite series, especially the second class there, if you want to go into some more detail here. But it's for our purposes here today, it's just our basic language that we're going to be using. All right, we're already 38 minutes into this, so let's keep moving here. All right, so now we're going to go beyond the 10. So we'll go to 11. 11 is a really interesting number. 11, the traditional Golden Dawn understanding of this number is really radically different from the Thelemic understanding of it. And of course, that was very intentional on Crowley's part. Crowley's being kind of revolutionary, rethinking things, trying to kind of re-understand, like you see with the Beast in Babylon are one of the great examples of that, this sort of inversion of taking things that are very like negative, kind of evil sort of symbols, and then finding the divine within them, or even elevating them to some of the highest principles. And we see that same sort of thing happening with the 11. So in the Golden Dawn, 11 is understood primarily as 10 plus 1. So it's like 1 more than the 10 Sephiroth. And so this is like beyond the 10 Sephiroth, or like below the 10 Sephiroth, as if you were continuing down like below Malkuth, another step, right? As we're dropping down the tree, you keep going even further down, and you end up in the Kalipoth, the world of the shells. And so just illustrate this from Westcott's book Numbers, which is a great book that I recommended 2 weeks ago. But he presents this very evil version of 11 here. And he says, the Kabbalists contrasted it meaning 11, with the perfection of the decad, right? The perfection of the 10. And just as the Sephirothic number is the 10 is the form of all good things, so 11 is the essence of all that is sinful, harmful, and imperfect. With the 10 Sephiroth, they contrasted the 11 averse Sephiroth, right? So these are like the Sephirothic or the Klipothic, Sephiroth, the shells, symbols of destruction, violence, defeat, and death. But Crowley reinterprets this, and we'll see more about why this happens and all that sort of, both this class and our next class. Reinterprets 11 as being primarily 5 plus 6, where 5 is the microcosm, like we were talking about, and then 6 is the macrocosm. So 5 plus 6 is the union of the microcosm and the macrocosm, which is another way of talking about the great work and becoming an adept. The union of adept and angel, the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. This is symbolized by the number 11. So this is a really radical change from something that is very evil and bad to the formula of the great work itself. All right, and 12. We spent a lot of time talking about 12, in reference to the zodiacs and that astrological magic series I did. We talked a lot about the importance of 12 as 2 times 6 and as 3 times 4, the permutations of those different qualities. And so you could bring all of that material in, like at this point in the class as well, right? So the 12 signs of the zodiac, right? And so the zodiac representing the belt, that surround the belt of the visible stars, the furthest sphere there, and then also kind of by extension represents the entire the entire sphere of the fixed stars, the cosmos itself, and because it has this the 12 signs and the fact that they make a circle, you get this idea of completion and fullness out of the 12. It represents like totality, and we'll see that same logic in some other numbers that can also represent completion and fullness. And I just had grabbed 2 quotes here. I just thought were interesting because they use some of the same language, talking about the number 12 in relation to cosmos and stars. So in Revelation, this is from King James, we read, and there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. Which is an interesting image from Revelation. And of course, if William Blake did some really great paintings of the woman clothed with the sun. And then we see an echo of this language in Liber 65. This is the Adonai, the holy guardian angel, kind of under in the image of the serpent, the serpent that wraps around the heart of the adept. We read, "My head is jeweled with 12 stars. My body is white as milk of the stars. It is bright with the blue of the abyss of stars invisible," which is a really beautiful line, I think. We also have the 12 permutations of the name Yod-He Vav-He, the 12 permutations of the Tetragrammaton, which can be linked to the 12 signs of the zodiac and used as divine names for invoking zodiacal powers, as we talked about in that astrological magic class series. And then also there's the very important divine name Hu, spelled He Vav Aleph, which means generally it means he, and I'm not sure if there would be different. There may be different vowel pointings, but He Vav Aleph can also mean she or it, so it's not necessarily masculine. It also has the sense of like himself or herself, and so this is a divine name of Kether, right? A name for one of the most sacred names for the divine unity, and we'll see that a couple more times today. All right, and then we'll move on to 13. So we're going to talk about some other prime numbers. Of course, we already have talked about some prime numbers, below 10, and we'll see more. And I want always, that's not always, well, I think you can always interpret that, right? Because the prime numbers are not divisible, right? Their only factors are 1 in themselves. But I think that's especially salient with the 13 here. And so as we talked about 2 weeks ago, the words for one or unity in Hebrew, echad, and ahava or ehebe, so I hear a lot of people pronouncing it as, meaning love, both of these words sum to 13. And so this idea of love and unity are, that's what we're getting out of the 13 here. And so in some sense, we can say that the 13 equals 1, right? Because the 13 is expressive of unity. And so Crowley talks about this, that we can almost develop a scale of number as using multiples of 13 as extensions of numbers, right? So that the 2 can be multiplied by the 13 to get 26. So 26 is kind of like an extension of the 2 because you're multiplying it by unity. And then 3, multiplied by 13 is 39. So again, 39 is a kind of like extension of the triad, because it's the triad multiplied by unity, which is still the triad. So this allows you to get extra or like more numbers out of a small number that you might want to analyze. If you're interested in the 2 or the 3, you can look at 26 or 39. And of course, that goes up, as high as you want. Any number multiplied by 13 will be connected back to that number that got multiplied. 13 sort of preserves the number that it gets multiplied by. And you can also, of course, use this backwards. If you're investigating a number and you find that it's divisible by 13, whatever that other number is that gets multiplied by 13 to produce the number you're interested in, you can make a lot out of that number itself. So this is, you can analyze, as well as use it as a technique for getting more information. And again, this is an important thing with the factoring, as we talked about, and we'll see a lot more as we go through today. All right, skipping a little bit ahead, we've got 17 here, which is a really interesting number, kind of a complex one too. So the divine name Iao, which can be converted into Hebrew equivalents of Yod, Aleph, Vav, that sums to 17. And in Greek, it sums to 811. So 811 is also an interesting number connected to the 17. And a brief note about the Greek. We'll see a little bit of Greek today. In general, I think that it makes a lot of sense, and this is the way we usually teach this, is that you don't just automatically mix together like Greek and Hebrew words that have the same values. Like if you find some Greek word that sums to a certain number, don't just immediately go to Sefer Sephiroth and look up like Hebrew words that sum to that same number. We can kind of think of like, Greek numerology and Hebrew numerology existing in sort of like separate universes. And in general, we want to keep those things separate. But there are times when we will break that rule, but only for things that are important and for places that we get like especially important numbers out of it. We don't want to mix Greek and Hebrew as like a general concept, but you can do it when it's important enough. And we'll see that a couple times today. Yes, like 93, exactly. And that is one of the ones that we will see very shortly. So then we also have on the right there, you see the swastika as used in the Golden Dawn with the sun at the center, then the 12 signs of the zodiac organized by their element. Right, so you have like the fire arm, you have Aries, Leo, Sagittarius, and then fire, and then the same for the other triplicities there. So you have these like 17 squares that in the form of this like whirling elemental forces. Now, Aleph, as we talked about 2 weeks ago, is the thunderbolt by shape. So the fact that 17 is connected to the thunderbolt, and the thunderbolt is connected to Aleph, and Aleph has a value of 1, 17 also expresses the idea of unity, and in a way can be like 13 in that way, that multiples of 17 can express, the unity in some sort, or can express a number in like an extended form. And we'll see that in just a moment with this quote here. Now, also, this idea about these whirling forces. Now, the one, of course, Kether, the heaven of Asaya associated with Kether is the Reshith HaGalgalim, the primal swirlings, right? This kind of primal like swirling or movement of the primordial forces of creation here. And so I'm just going to read this quote here. This is from the Vision of the Voice from the 6th Aether. And so we read, but now I come into the center of the maze, and whirling dust of stars and great forgotten gods. It is the whirling swastika which throws off all these things. For the swastika is in Aleph by shape and number, right, which we just talked about, and in Beth by the position of the arms of the magician. So we think of the magician of the tarot, one arm pointing up and the other arm pointing down. That's a bit like the shape of the swastika, right? You have like an arm pointing up and an arm pointing down. Right, so the magician of the tarot is like making the shape of the thunderbolt here. So in Beth, of course, corresponds to the magician of the tarot. Right, so it's in Beth by the position of the arms of the magician, and in Gimel because of the sign of the morning of Isis. Right, so if you know in the ritual of the hexagram in the analysis of the keyword there, when you're giving those signs, the sign of the morning of Isis, you're making a similar sort of position. You're raising one arm upward and the other arm downward, and it's all kind of at 90-degree angles. So the shape that you're making with your body is very much like this. And Isis is being linked to Gimel, through the moon and the high priestess and all that. Right, so it's also in Gimel by the sign of the morning of Isis. And so Aleph, Beth, and Gimel are the 3 paths that emanate out of Kether, right? And so we read, and this is the crown, right, Kether, defended by these three thunderbolts, right, these three paths that emanate out of Kether are like three thunderbolts coming from the crown. And then we read, and is not thrice 17 51, that is failure and pain, right? So 17 times 3 is 51, which sums to, well, there's two words. I always forget which one is which. One is spelled Aleph Nun, and the other is Nun Aleph, and one means failure, and the other means pain. And so these are like the ordeals of initiation that protect the crown. So it's a nice demonstration of the way that we can employ this symbolism in unpacking, kind of actual doctrine and teachings, not teachings about the nature of the nature of the work. All right, then we get to 21. And again, I'm skipping over, 18 and 19 are both really interesting numbers. I'm definitely skipping 14. I have a particular interest in number 14 as well. I think there's a lot of other, interesting stuff here. I'm just giving you a highlight of some of the most important ones. All right, so 21 has a bunch of important things, and we'll see 21 actually a couple more times in our class today. It's the sum of 1 to 6, right? And 6 is the number of Tefereth. So the mystic number of the Sephiroth is the sum of 1 to that number, right? So the mystic number of Chokmah would be 3 because it's 1 plus 2. The mystic number of Binah is 6 because it's 1 plus 2 plus 3. So the mystic number of Tefereth is the sum of 1 to 6. Right, and so that's associated with the sun, it's the center, the heart of the tree, all of that Tefereth stuff can be brought in here. It's also the value of the important divine name Eheye, Aleph He, Yod He, which means I am or I will be, and we often take to be existence, existence itself, and it's the divine name of Kether, that kind of primordial identity or primordial like consciousness. It's also the value of Yod He Vav, which are the first 3 letters of the Tetragrammaton, and actually kind of the only letters in the Tetragrammaton, right? The Tetragrammaton is Yod He Vav He. The 4th letters are just a repetition of the He. So the 3 unique letters, or the first 3 letters, are Yod He Vav, which sum to 21. They're also called the 3 fathers in Sefer Yetzirah, and so I've given you the reference there of where to look up in the Sefer Yetzirah if you want to look into that. We don't have time to get into it now, but the Yod He Vav are like the 3 fathers that kind of correspond to the 3 mother letters, Aleph, Mem, and Shin. Now, these in the Sefer Yetzirah, these 3 letters, Yod He Vav, they can be, there's 6 permutations, 6 ways of ordering those 3 letters, and so these 6 permutations correspond with the 6 directions, up, down, east, west, north, and south. These 6 directions, which again have a kind of sense of totality. It's all directions. Is related to this Yod He Vav through the Sefer Yetzirah. And in fact, it's also just worth noting that 21 equals 7 times 3, and 7 times 3 are both very, very important numbers, as we've already discussed. And really important, divine numbers, right? The divine triads, the supernal triad, and again, all the things we were saying about the nature of the heptad here as well. All right, then we come to 22. So 22 is that number of Hebrew letters, and by, because it's the number of Hebrew letters, it's also the number of paths on the tree, and it's also the number of the major arcana in the tarot, right? So you have the 22 trump cards, which, just by virtue of the fact that there were 22 trumps and there were 22 Hebrew letters, 22 paths on the tree, people, a couple hundred years ago went, oh, okay, you go to 2 sets of 22. It's very natural to look at the correspondences of those 2 sets of 22, and we might also think that, there's something, some kind of, the archetype is being expressed here. If not, some people, of course, believe that this was very intentional. The tarot was very intentionally designed on the basis of the Hebrew alphabet, but we might also think that there's just something special about the number of 22 that just manifests itself in different places without necessarily any human consciously intending this to happen. And so similar to what we said about 12, because it represents the entire Hebrew alphabet or every path on the tree, or every trump in the tarot, it has that same sense of completion and totality. All right, next we have the important number 26. Now, the most important thing about 26 is that it is the sum of the Tetragrammaton, the value of Tetragrammaton, Yod He Vav He, 10 plus 5 plus 6 plus 5, is 26. And so we're not going to spend any time on this here, but we'll spend quite a bit of time on the Tetragrammaton 2 weeks from now. And the Tetragrammaton is so important, we could very easily do an entire class or even a class series just on the Tetragrammaton alone. But we'll just save that for 2 weeks from now. And even then, there will only be an overview. Yeah, it's absolutely perhaps the most important formula and name in our work, and there's sort of no end to its importance and the different things that it can contain and express. Let's see, 26 is also, and this is of course related to the importance of Yod He Vav He and the fact that like the Yod He Vav He in a way contains the entire tree of life, and we'll talk about how that is in a couple weeks. It's also the sum of the Sephiroth on the middle pillar, right? So Kether 1 plus Tifereth 6 plus Yesod 9 plus Malkuth 10 equals 26. So we see some of this idea, that idea again is repeated, that the Tetragrammaton summarizes or contains the entire tree, just like the 4 contain the 10 in the Pythagorean Tetractys. So we kind of have a confirmation of that idea here by enumerating the Sephiroth on the middle pillar. All right, and then it's also worth noting that 26 is 13 times 2, right? So this is like the unity, multiplied by the dyad, right? So kind of unity and duality combined together, which is absolutely part of the Tetragrammaton, right? It expresses the one reality, the one divine under a fourfold formula. Right? We have the 4 worlds that are, the one reality that we live in. And we can just see that right there in the number itself. All right, skipping over again a couple other, 27, 28 are both very interesting numbers as well. But yeah, come to 31 here, which is an especially important number in a lot of Crowley's work, and we'll see it again in 2 weeks from now when it's going to get used as part of a larger formula. So the 2 most important words here for 31 are actually just permutations of each other. We have Aleph Lamed, which is El, which is a name of God, just means God. It's also specifically the divine name of Hesed. And I was just noting here that, Hesed is the 4th Sephirah. 3 plus 1 equals 4. So we have that kind of connection of Hesed to this as well here. And then also we have Lamed Aleph, which I believe is pronounced lo in Hebrew, and it means not, right? It's like a negation. And so Crowley, especially takes this idea and says, okay, so L equals lo, God equals not, or that God is not. And of course, we can understand this on a number of different registers. It's both like a denial of the idea of like a kind of external, separate, monotheistic God, as well as a very deep mystical truth that, kind of the void itself, that nothingness itself is the divinity, right? Not just, there is no divinity, but the nature of divinity is somehow nothingness. And that kind of unity of the divine and the nothing is the reason that we have creation at all. So yeah, an important formula, and we'll see this again in 2 weeks, as well as in a few minutes. All right, next we have the number 32. Now this again has some of that same quality that 12 and 22 had of completion and totality, because it's the 32 paths of wisdom, which is the 10 Sephiroth plus the 22 paths for the 32 total paths. Of course, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that. 32 paths of wisdom. Each one has a Qabalistic text. Where each path, has like a text and a name associated with it. But again, it has that idea of it's all 32 paths. It's the entire tree. So again, summarizing like finality, totality, completion, fullness, all these kind of ideas. Now, a name. This is something we'll talk about a lot more in 2 weeks. If you take the 2 divine names, Aheye and the Tetragrammaton, right? So Aheye is Aleph He Yod He, and the Tetragrammaton is Yod He Vav He, and you kind of like overlap them at the Yod He. You get Aleph He Yod He Vav He, which sums to 32. And there's some other really interesting stuff that we can do with that. This 6-lettered divine name, and we'll talk about that in 2 weeks. And then also importantly, and this is an important word in the Sefer Yetzirah, is the word lev, which means heart. That also sums to 32. And we can think about this sort of the tree itself. This finality and totality and completion. Being like the heart of creation, or your heart, your own heart, the heart of your being. Is a microcosm of the full creation. I think a lot of these ideas can be connected there. And yeah, you can check out the Sefer Yetzirah for more about what it. Just look for the word heart, when you're studying the Sefer Yetzirah, and just remember that sums to 32. All right, another number here, 37. 37 is mainly just important for being the value of Yechida, which means something like one only or only one, one alone. And this is in the parts of the soul. The Yechida is the highest part of the soul, and it corresponds to Kether. So Crowley it simply calls it man's crown, the crown of humanity, or the individual human. This is the Kether, the monad, the divine unity within the individual. So the core of your personal essence, right, is this Yechida, the only one. And again, the highest part of the soul. Also, just interesting to note that 37 is 3 plus 7. So again, we have that 3 and the 7. The supernal triad, the 7 Sephiroth below that, the triad, the heptad, equals 10, and then 10 as 1 plus 0 again reduces to 1, just emphasizing that oneness we have here of Kether and the meaning of Yechida. And if we multiply those together, we also get 21, which, as we just saw, was the value of Eheye, the divine name of Kether. All right, next we have a really interesting number 45. I'm just going to give you just a few of the basic significations here, but there's a lot more that you can look into, and definitely pay attention to the number 45 when it occurs. So first of all, it's the value of Adam, which is we understand as not the first human, but the name for humanity itself. And understood as a kind of the hermaphrodite, encompassing all possible genders and all that sort of stuff, not as a man. So we have Adam, the name of humanity, which can be analyzed as Dam, Daleth Mem, which means blood in Hebrew, plus breath or life. So the idea of like the life breath infusing the blood, or the life breath circulating within the blood. That's what we are. We are the union of that life breath with the physical substance that makes up our bodies. We also have the name Ma, which is the secret name of Yetzirah. It's also as I talked about in the Garments of the Infinite series, you can spell Tetragrammaton in full in different ways in each one of the 4 worlds. And so the spelling of Tetragrammaton in Yetzirah also sums to 45. So you have this connection to Yetzirah. And Crowley talks about that as humanity's next step is to move to Yetzirah. Unawakened humanity is in Messiah, but then we need to kind of wake to Yetzirah as like the next step for humanity's awakening. We can also see some of this in the factoring of 45. It's 5 times 9, and of course 4 plus 5 also equals 9. And so you have 5, the microcosm, the pentagram, humanity, which is again another image of humanity. And then the 9, this is Yesod, and the Sefer Yesod has a special relationship to the world of Yetzirah. So just reinforcing some of what we already said there. All right, let's keep moving on here. So next we have the number 61, which again, we already saw ayin, under 0, but the actual, the word ayin sums to 61, 1 plus 10 plus 50 is 61. Again, this means not, negative, non-existent, the Godhead, or like I said, the God of negative theology, or the Godhead beyond existence, or beyond like the duality of existence and non-existence. And a few references here from the Book of the Law, from Liber El. Nothing is a secret key of this law. 61, the Jews call it. I call it 880, 418. And that 880, 418, that's something that Crowley struggled to understand. I'm not sure that he ever completely worked it out. So that's something, a kind of Kabbalistic puzzle, that is interesting to think about and work out there. More references to not. In chapter 2, we have Hadith saying, "For I am perfect, being not." And then in chapter 3, we read, this is Rahor Quit, "I'm the Lord of the double wand of power, the wand of the force of Kofnia." Kofnia is a really interesting thing, and there's a whole interesting story about how Crowley didn't hear that word, and then Rose had to kind of figure out what the word was supposed to have been that Crowley didn't catch in the dictation of the Book of the Law. And so you can look into that. One thing that Nia, if you read it right to left, is ayin. So almost as if like she had received it, but like backwards. And anyways, you can look into Crowley's like commentaries for more on that. But you do have that ayin in Nia backwards. "But my left hand is empty, for I have crushed an universe, and naught remains." Right, and again that 61 being the ayin, or the not, not as well as nought, right, 0. and N-A-U-G-H-T as well. And then finally, two other words that sum to 6 to 1. You have ani, which means I or myself, as well as Adon, which is kind of another version of Adonai, meaning Lord. And the idea of I or myself, again, sort of summarizing, expressing the unity of the individual with the divine, but here under the form of the zero. So rather than identifying the self with the one here, this is the kind of identifying the self with the not, with the non-existent. And I've always kind of interpreted this in a very kind of along the lines of like Mahayana Buddhist thinking about shunyata and the idea of emptiness. Which of course that emptiness is the Buddha nature, which is the nature of you and everything. That's how I've kind of interpreted some of that idea that Ani 61 is equal to Ayin 61. And of course, Ani and Ayin don't just sum to the same number. They're actually just permutations of each other. Or what do you call it? Anagrams, right? All right, 65. So 65, we saw 65 a couple of times 2 weeks ago, but just kind of summarizing what we saw there. Adonai, sums to 65, meaning Lord. It's a divine name, of Malkuth, but also, especially in like the Thelemic Holy Books, is a word especially used to talk about the holy guardian angel and the adept's relationship to that higher being. Spelled in full, Adonai equals 671, and we'll see that in a few minutes. The two digits here, 5 and 6, of course, are microcosm and macrocosm, and sum to 11, the number of the great work, as we saw, the union of adept and angel, right? 65 is also 5 times 13. So you have, 13, again, the principle of unity, of love, multiplied by 5, the pentagram, the microcosm, humanity, the 5 elements crowned by spirit. And then like in Liber 65, we've got 5 chapters, each of which, attributed to one of the 5 elements. So we can see that right there in the number 65 itself. And then finally, Crowley does this thing, I'm not sure exactly what to think of it, but just something for your consideration here. So 65 in Roman numerals would be written as LXV, and you can rearrange LXV to be LVX, which is lux or light, and also like an important formula, from the Golden Dawn. I don't know. You kind of have to develop your own like bullshit filter about Kabbalah, and you might find that sometimes Crowley seems to really kind of stretch things. So this would be an example of something that I'm not so sure about. Expressing it as a Roman numeral and then like rearranging those and interpreting them as letters. I don't know, but Crowley gives that. Okay, 72. So 72 is an interesting and an important number. So this is called the Shem Hamfarash, which is the divided name, which is these 72 sort of triliteral or 72 three-lettered names of God. And so this is derived from Exodus in book 14, verses 19, 20, and 21. Each one of those verses in Hebrew has exactly 72 letters in it. So what you do is you pull a letter from each one of the lines to form 72 three-lettered names. The thing that's a little bit weird and confusing about here is that, so you're going to go like just right to left for the first and third lines. Then the middle line, you read left to right. So like the first divine name that you would pull would be the first letter of the first line, which is Vav, and then the last letter of the second line, which is He, and then the first letter of the third line, which is Vav again. So the first name would be Vav, He, Vav. Then the second name would be the second letter of the first line, which would be Yod, then the second to last letter of the second line, which would be Lamed, and then the second letter of the third line, which would be Yod again. So this would be like Yod, Lamed, Yod. And then you just do that 70 more times, and you get these 72 three-letter names of God. And then you can take those 72 names and add either Yod He or Aleph Lamed as like a kind of divine like suffix to those names, and then you can get the names of 72 angels. And in some advanced magical practices, you can work with these 72 angels, and that's how you derive the names of them. And there's a lot more of that you can look into, but that's the basic idea. here. Let's see some other things for 72. It's the value of the name Hesed. Again, the fourth Sephra, meaning mercy or loving kindness. It's also the value of Yod plus Yod He plus Yod He Vav plus Yod He Vav He. So again, that's like the Pythagorean tetractys here. The one letter, two, then three, then four. And you can, as I talked about this in the Garments of the Infinite series, you can kind of form the tetractys out of, the first line is just He, then the second is Yod He, in place of just like the dots the Pythagoreans used. So you can do that with the Tetragrammaton, and that sums to 72 total. You can also divide the zodiac into 72 5-degree sections, and the 72 angels each rule like a 5-degree section of the zodiac. So you can use them for astrological magic and for interpreting astrological charts and things like that. And again, you get some of that sense of completion too, because these 72 like 5-degree divisions are going to be the full and complete zodiac. So again, some of that same quality that like 12, 22, and 32 had of fullness and completion. And finally, it's also Ob, Ayin Beth, which is the secret name of Atziluth, and as well as the spelling of Tetragrammaton in Atziluth. So an important divine name, or important number, linked to a whole series of different divine names. All right, next we have 78. I should have done 77. Oh, well, there's so many good numbers. All right, so 78, again, actually 78 has some of that same quality of completeness and totality because it's the number of cards in the tarot deck, right? You have 78 cards. 78 is also the sum of 1 to 12. And again, 12 has some of that sense of completion as well. So it's the sum of 1 to 12. And the sum of 1 to 12 here can be considered as like a mystic number of Kether, because one of the names of Kether is Hu, right? That divine He, that the personal pronoun, for the divinity as a divine name of Kether. The sum of 1 to 12 can be considered a mystic number of Kether. And then it also sums to the word Mesla, which Crowley and the Golden Dawn always interpret as the influence that descends from Kether. That's a little bit of a change from, this is actually from like Lurianic Qabalah. It means something slightly different for Luria, but it's similar in a way. It's like the divine light, but it's a little bit different than the descent from Kether. So that's something you could look into if you're curious about it. But for all intents and purposes, it's basically the same thing, this idea of the divine light that descends from the highest. All right, then we have 80. This is like an incredibly important number, but I always just thought this was interesting, and I think it's a nice little illustration of some like techniques here. So 80, of course, is just the value of the letter Pe, which corresponds to Mars, and to Atu 16, which is the tower. Right, basic meanings there. Now 8 can be broken down. Well, 80 can be broken down in a few different ways. But if we analyze it as 8 times 10, we have 8. The value of intellect, Hod, Mercury, at its most material. Like multiplied by 10, right? Because 10 is manifestation, Malkuth. So the intellect at its most material is ruin, right? Which is the tower. The lightning struck tower. This is how Crowley analyzes 80 as intellect in its most material form as ruin. But interestingly, 80 is also the value of the name of Yesod. And so you can see on the tree, right, like Yesod is here. So this has a value of 80. And if we look at Pe is right above Yesod. So Pe connects Netzach to Hod. And Yesod is also the product of Hod and Netzach. So I think that's really interesting that you get twice in two different ways. You have 80 relating to the relationship between Netzach and Hod. It's both the path that joins them as well as their child or the thing that they produced. They're both 80. And there's other interesting stuff you can go into here too. But yeah, I think that's a good sort of start. And I just think it's an interesting way of looking at a number, on the tree. We've got Yesod and we've got Pe. Like, wait, how does Pe, relate to Yesod on the tree? And then we can derive, even more as I just did. You can derive even more things from the kind of geometry and positioning on the tree. All right, 91, a really important and very sacred number here. It's first and foremost the value of Amen, which Crowley calls the holiest title of God. And now I don't know if this is actually like historically true, but the idea was that Amen was derived from the Greek or the Egyptian god Amun. And there's an idea that Amun was, that oaths were sworn in the name of Amun, and so that becomes saying like Amen at the end of prayers. Again, I don't know that's actually historically true, but that's kind of this kind of esoteric kind of etymology of Amen. And Amun is, a creator god, so the symbolism works very well. Now with final values, now the 741, it sums to 741 if you use the noon final, right? Because then it'd be 700 plus 40 for Mem and 1 for Aleph. You get 741, which is an incredibly important number in its own right, but it is the value of the 4 elements, right? You have Aleph, Mem, Shin, the 3 mother letters that correspond to air, water, and fire, and then Tav, which also corresponds to Saturn, also is Earth. So you have the 4 elements here. So the idea that, like Amen, this name of the highest God, also expresses the 4 elements. 91 is the sum of 1 to 13. And so again, it's a mystic number of Kether, as Echad, unity. You can see, 91 is an extension of that 13 as 13 times 13, which is essentially another form of 1, another form of unity. 91 is also 7 times 13. So Crowley calls this the septenary in its most spiritual form, right? So 13 being the most spiritual form of a number, and then the septenary, that 7, that heptad, the 7 planets, et cetera, et cetera. And then he also gives the Yod He Vav He Adonai. There's a lot of these kind of composite divine names where you're taking 2 divine names and like putting them together. We'll see a couple more examples of this, and there's lots more as well to get these kind of like composite divine names. So you get Yod He Vav He Adonai, which is an 8-lettered divine name. And so Crowley talks about this linking the 7 and the 8, which was the number of creation and the number of regeneration, the number of the planets, and then the number of the stars. Somehow those 2 numbers, 7 and 8, Crowley felt were linked by this number 91 here as 7 times 13 and then an 8-letter divine name. All right, and then we come to 93 and we've got some more Greek. So in the Book of the Law, of course, the 2 key lines, the key expressions, of the law, do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law, and love is the law, love under will. So it was discovered, and not by Crowley. I forget who it was now. Actually, one of Crowley's students discovered that in Greek, the word for will is thelema, and the word for love, or one word for love, is agape, right? So love and will, and they both have the same value, which is 93. And so that's why we use, when you all came in today, I said, hey, 93, everybody, right? 93 is used as a shorthand for these 2 expressions: do what thou wilt for the whole of the law, and love is the law, love under will, right? Every love there and will, all sum to 93. And obviously there's the idea of that the law or the will is love, that these things are all identified with each other. And the will here is, like, if you look at the where the word thelema occurs, like in the New Testament, it's used for the will of God. It's not like, like the personal sense of like willpower or something like that, or like, the willpower to, I don't know, resist a temptation or something like that. This is like the will of God. This is like a divine will. Of course, we understand this as the divine will, emanating from or being expressed through, each individual. But yeah, that's the word thelema, and love. So yeah, there's lots of interesting things about 93. Just a couple of other important things here, and an interesting, again, illustration of some techniques here that we can use. The 3 what are called the reciprocal paths on the tree. These are the 3 horizontal paths. So we have Daleth, which connects Hokmah to Bina, Teth, which connects Hesed to Gevurah, and then Pe, which connects Netzach to Hod. The 3 horizontal or reciprocal paths on the tree. If you sum up the values of those 3 letters, right, 4 plus 9 plus 80 is 93. And there's some other interesting stuff there too, right? Daleth corresponds to Venus, and Pe corresponds to Mars, right? So you get Venus at the top, and then Mars at the bottom, and in the middle you have Teth. And if you think of like the, especially in the Crowley Harris deck, you see Babylon riding on the beast. It's like the union of Mars and Venus, the union of like the male and female powers united together. So like the highest path, the lowest path, united in the center, and then all 3 sum to 93, and that's connected to the symbol of Babylon and the beast. Like there's a lot there in just that simple little thing that you could you reflect on and I think derive even more stuff from by reflecting on the symbols and some of the other kind of numerical patterns that you can find there. 93 is also one way that the name Iwas, this is of course the minister of Horpar Krat. Crowley eventually comes to understand this is his own holy guardian angel, the entity that speaks the book of the law, and the Crowley then takes the dictation from. Crowley will turn this name into Hebrew in a few different ways and into Greek, and enumerate it with some other values as well, like 78 and 418. There's some other values that can be derived here, but one of them is what you see on the screen there, and it sums to 93. 93 is also 31 times 3. So we saw that 31, the sort of God and not, which are really important themes throughout the book of the law, the divinity and the not, the non-existent, the nothingness, which is also infinity, right? A lot of those themes there can be encapsulated by 31, and 93 is 31 times 3. And we'll actually see a threefold formula next week, the Lashtal formula, which really uses that fact and really develops it. So we'll see that in 2 weeks. All right, let's just keep moving on here. Next we have 111. So in the book of the law, we read, "My prophet is a fool with his 111. Are not they the ox, and none by the book?" Right, so Aleph spelled in full is Aleph Lamed Pei, sums to 111. Right, and Aleph is the value of 1. Aleph, of course, means ox, and that's our basic signification for Aleph. And Aleph, of course, though it has a value of 1, it corresponds to Atu 0, which is the fool, right? So we can see how that line from the book of the law, "My prophet is a fool with his 111. Are not they the ox, and none by the book," right? The book here being like the tarot. There's some other interesting things about that line too, but I will not interpret it for you. But some good stuff to reflect on there. All right, and then this is something Crowley makes a lot of. It talks about a lot and just uses a lot, is the fact that Aleph, although it expresses the unity, the life breath, the beginning, all of this sort of stuff, it also is the value of thick darkness and sudden death, which on the one hand expresses some of this kind of the unity of dualities, or the idea of like the annihilation of the ego, in the process of the divine work, or the overcoming of the ego, and also just some of the kind of weird things that happen, from studying Kabbalah. We're finding numbers that seem to mean very opposite things. So the word he uses for thick darkness, that's from Exodus there, and you can look up that reference. Now this word, Aleph Samek Nun, meaning sudden death, I have not been able to track that down. Doesn't mean that it doesn't exist or anything like that, but I haven't been able to find that anywhere. But Crowley uses this a lot, this idea of thick darkness and sudden death being the same as the unity and the creation and everything. 111 is also a number of the sun. It's the sum of, well, this will make a lot more sense. I was going to do magic squares today, but as you can see, there's definitely no time for it. There's barely time for what I did include. So I'm going to move magic squares to the last class in this series. I originally said I was going to do it today, but I'll move it to the last class. So this will make more sense when you see the magic squares. 111 comes out of the magic square for the sun. It's the sum of 1 to 6 squared divided by 6. And so this is the third number of the sun. So it comes out of the magic square of the sun, which is a 6 by 6 square. It's also the value of Echad Hu Elohim, which is another kind of composite name of God. The Om, right, the sacred, Indian word, the kind of seed syllable there, that I'm sure you're all familiar with, translated into Hebrew. One way of translating it into Hebrew is as Aleph Ayin Mem, which would sum to 111. And actually, we'll see that again in a few minutes using the final value from Mem. 111 is also, and Crowley again makes a big deal about this point as well, that 111 is 37 times 3, right? So that Yechida, the one, the part of the soul that corresponds to Kether, expressed as a kind of triad or in like a triadic formula. And of course, we see 111 is literally 3 ones. It's 1, 1, 1. And so Yechida as 1 multiplied by 3 also gives you 111. So you get at that same truth kind of two different ways, or more than 2 different ways. There's a lot more here with 111. 111 is a very, very important number, but that's some of the basics for you. Okay, now 120, again, a really complex number and a really important one, especially in the Golden Dawn tradition. Yeah, and Crowley, well, we'll see this in a few minutes. Crowley modifies this formula into something that he considers to be superior. But again, just a few of the basic significations for 120. It's 5 factorial, which means 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5, which sums to 120. So we can see 120 as an extension of the pentagram. Factorial is another thing that you can use. This is our only example of it here. But yeah, you can take the factorial of a number and use that to analyze the number as well. So we can see this 120 as an expression of a pentagram, as an expression of spirit crowning the 4 elements and all that sort of stuff. Now, I'm not going to be able to explain this right now, but if you're familiar with the legend of Christian Rosenkreuz, the founding legend of the Rosicrucian tradition, on Christian Rosenkreuz's tomb was written post. What is it? Centum Vignati Annos Patebo. In 120 years, I will open. This is the length of time that the tomb of Christian Rosenkreuz is sealed in that legend. And then his followers open the tomb after that 120 years and discover the secrets of the Rosicrucian tradition and all that. So you can look at the Fama Fraternitatis for more about that. But it's connected to these Rosicrucian ideas. And the tomb of Christian Rosenkreuz can be connected to Tefereth by a few different ways. Other things for 120, we have the letter Samek spelled in full. We also have the divine name On, which is in Hebrew is understood as Ayin Nun, which is a divine name for the sun. And so a really interesting thing on the tree here is that we've been talking about Tefereth, right? So Samek is the path that leads upward from Yesod to Tefereth, and then On being a name of the sun, right? The sun itself is identified with Tefereth, but the 2 letters that spell On, Ayin, right, is here leading from Hod to Tefereth, and Nun leads from Netzach to Tefereth. So we have all 3 paths leading upward to Tefereth. We've seen Tefereth itself and the sun, right? So all these kind of really converging on a very clear sort of idea of the attainment to Tefereth. And 120 is used as an important number of the attainment, like in the Golden Dawn system. There's a bunch of other things too, but just one last thing here. We have life, love, liberty, and light, which is a sort of set of 4 principles that show up a lot in Crowley's work. And so obviously that repetition of that L, anytime you see like an alliteration like that, well, sometimes it just means that Crowley's been taking cocaine, and it's just real. Like you can see it like when he's on like stimulants. He really loves alliteration and just kind of goes crazy with it for no apparent purpose. But if it's obvious that the alliteration is having like an actual function, that can often be a clue that there's like some Kabbalistic information to be unpacked there. And so looking at that, whatever that letter is that's being repeated, as well as the number of repetitions that are being made, right? So L is the equivalent of the Hebrew Lamed, which is 30, multiplied by 4 is 120. And I also see this extended to 150 with the addition of the 5th L for law, and we see this in like Liber 150, which really unpacks these 4 principles of life, love, liberty, and light, and then the 5th principle of law. And then there's some other interesting gematria of 150, but you can look into Liber 150 for that. All right, next, another really important number here in our system is 156. And this is the value of the name Babylon. Interesting, this is the value of her name both in Hebrew and in Greek. Jim Eshelman has an argument about why it should also be the value of her name in Enochian, but I'm not sure that I buy his argument around the change in the Enochian values. But it is the value of her name both in Hebrew and in Greek. Of course, I've talked about Babylon in a few other classes here, and we'll talk about her and the beast as well, again in the 4th class again here. But that's something you'll just have to look up on your own if you're not familiar with her. Her name can actually be understood as a formula as well as Bab El On. So Bab is through some sort of Chaldean root or something like that. I forget how that works exactly, but Bab is understood as meaning gate, and then El, name of God, and then On, the name of the sun that we just saw. So Babylon is the gate of the god On. So you can think of her as like the womb from which the sun emerges, or like the darkness from which the light is born. 156 is a whole bunch of important factors. Most importantly, it's 12 times 13, which is the dimension of the Enochian tablets. Each one of those Enochian tablets is 12 by 13 squares. And of course, Babylon is very deeply connected to the Enochian system, as I talked about in the Vision and the Voice class that I did what was that, in July, I think. So you can check that out for more there. Yeah, they're really important connection there with the Enochian tablets. Other important factors, and these are all, if you're interested in her and her name, I definitely advise you to look at the factors of her name. So 26 times 6, 39 times 4, and 78 times 2 are all really interesting, and you can get a lot out of those factors. So I encourage you to look into that. Interestingly, 156 is also the value of Zion, and like in the Bible, Zion and Babylon, the city Babylon, are almost opposites. Zion is like the holy city, to be founded by the Messiah and all that sort of stuff, and Babylon is the place of like sin and idol worship and all that. But here we actually have the equation of those two things with each other, which is, I think, really beautiful and really encapsulates a lot of the ideas of the understanding, Babylon as a goddess, and some of that like inversion that I was talking about earlier, of taking an evil symbol and understanding it as actually concealing like a secret holiness. You can see that right in the equation of Babylon with Zion here. And then another interesting kind of numerological thing that happens is in the seal of the AA. That's the symbol you see on the right. I'm sure all of you are familiar with that. We have the one form of the seven-pointed star here, the heptagram with her name, Babylon, written around it. And then in the center, we have this, the kind of vesica, expression of the yoni there. And then we have a bunch of sevens surrounding it. So what the sevens are doing here is you're getting 77, right, plus 7 plus 7 divided by 7 plus 77, right? So 7 plus 7 divided by 7 plus 7 is 14, divided by 7 is 2. So it's 77 plus 2 plus 77 equals 156. So you have these 7 sevens, which is 49, obviously the square of 7, expressing the number 7, Venus, love, the heptad, the 7 planets, all of that sort of stuff. And now that those sevens are being transformed into 156. And yeah, there's so much more that we could say about that and its importance, but I'll just sort of leave you to reflect on that or to look for it in other readings of yours. All right, we're at an hour and a half now, but I've got, 5 or 6 more numbers for you. So yeah, we'll just keep going here. All right, so 207, not an extremely important number, but one that I've always thought was really interesting. It's the value of Ein Sof, right? The unlimited is 207, and then Or, meaning light, is also 207. So the Ein Sof Or, the limitless light, right? You have the 3 veils of the negative, the Ein Sof Or, the not limited, or the unlimited, or the infinite, and then the infinite light, or the limitless light, the 3 veils of the negative. The second veil, right, Ein Sof, sums to 207, and then the Or that's added to that to give you the third name also sums to 207, and then Ein Sof Or, of course, would be 207 times 2, which is 414, which we will see again in just a moment. And he's also just reflecting on this idea of Ein Sof as the infinite, being like equated with the principle of light here. All right, so this is 210. So this is Crowley's kind of improvement, what he feels is an improvement on the formula of 120. And it's also the corresponding mystical formula to 0 equals 2, where 0 equals 2 is a formula of creation, of multiplicity or specific things emerging out of the primal void. Here is like a return of the multiplicity back to the void. So instead of going from 0 to 2, now we're going from 2 to 0, the complementary mystical formula. And this is the NOx formula, which again, I talk about in the Vision of the Voice class more, so you can look there for a little bit more on that. And the Vision of the Voice is definitely the place to look for more about this formula. It's really unpacked and developed over those visions. Now, Crowley kind of sort of oddly interprets NOx, which is the Latin for night, nox, but understood as a formula, being the formula beyond LVX, like the night beyond the light. The mystical darkness. Interprets this as the Hebrew Nun Ayin Zadi. Zadi as X is a little strange, but it sums to 210, and I think justifies itself by the importance of the formula. And then, so yeah, Crowley says that 210 represents the reduction of the dyad, right? 2 to unity, 1 by love under will, and thence to 0 by dissolution and nuit. So this thing Crowley does a lot is like interprets numbers as a sequence. So 210 is interpreted as the sequence 2, 1, 0. So it's like a formula that moves from the 2 to the 1, right? The 2 things reuniting to 0, and then by their reunion, being dissolved into nuit, into that primordial void, which is the body of the goddess. That's a common thing for Crowley, and that's in a way Crowley's criticism of 120 is that 1 to 2 to 0 doesn't really work. That sequence doesn't really function as a mystical formula, and he thinks 2, 1, 0 functions a lot better. All right, and then we get 220. So this is the number of verses in Liber L, the number of verses in the Book of the Law between all 3 chapters. Now 220 is, among some other interesting factors, is 22 times 10, right? So in a way, we had 22 plus 10 was 32, right? The 22 paths and the 10 sephiroth, but now we're multiplying them together. And in the essay Gematria that I recommend you all read as a supplement to this series, Crowley says the whole of the law welded into one. The 22 times 10 expresses the whole of the law welded into one. Hence, we may be sure that the law shall stand as it is without a syllable of addition, right? So the completeness, kind of reinforcing the idea that do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. There is no law beyond do what thou wilt, right? Do what thou wilt is the complete and total law. Yeah, there's a bunch of other interesting things with 220. One here is the name Christian Rosenkreuz. If we interpret those initials CR into Hebrew as Kaf Resh, that sums to 220. And now this last thing here is something that I've never seen any other Thelemic author make this connection here. But in the Pythagoreans made a big deal about the numbers 220 and 284, which are amicable numbers. They're actually the smallest pair of amicable numbers, and the only pair of amicable numbers that are less than 1,000. Most of them are really large. And so what an amicable number or what amicable numbers are, is 2 numbers whose factors equal to each other, except for themselves. So the factors of 220, except for 220, added together equals 284. And the factors of 284, except for 284 itself, equals 220. So these 2 numbers are said to be amicable numbers. And again, most of them are very large. So this is probably the only pair of amicable numbers that's really relevant to our work. And I just thought it was an interesting thing that connects to this 220 here. 284 is an interesting number on its own, especially it has a word, I forget how to pronounce that in Hebrew now, but it's another word, but not Kether, but another word meaning crown. And so it expresses that idea of the unity, the top of the tree, and I think kind of nicely complements the formula of the entire 220 being like the entire tree. 284 is like the crown of the tree, and I think that expresses some of how we understand Rahur Queet as both like the entire tree as well as Kether. Again, that's sort of this equation here of the one, the unity, the source, identified with the totality. All right, the number 300 is the value of the letter Sheen, which corresponds with fire. It's also spirit, and it's especially is spirit because of its place in the Pentagrammaton, which is another formula that we'll discuss in 2 weeks, expressing the spirit descending into the center of the Tetragrammaton, the spirit descending into the middle of the 4 elements, Yod, He, Sheen, Vav, He. Sheen is understood as a triple flame, right? When we talked about that 2 weeks ago. And by Kabbalah, I always abbreviate Kabbalah of 9 chambers to just Q9C in all my own notes and everything. So by Kabbalah of the 9 chambers, 300 equals 3, or the value of Sheen is 3. So that idea of the triple flame. 300 is also the value of Ruach Elohim, which means the Spirit of God, and then which we see in the second verse in Genesis. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And so Levi and others have understood this as actually kind of expressing the hexagram, so that the Spirit of God, right, is that 300, that upward pointing fire triangle, which then gets reflected in the waters as the downward pointing water triangle, and then those 2 triangles together make the hexagram. And that's something I've talked about in a few other class series that I've done before. But yeah, that all links up to the 300. All right, 358, this is something we'll see again in 2 weeks, connected to an important formula that's not even listed here. Yeah, we'll get to it. It's the value of 2 important words, Messiah or Messiah. It literally means anointed or anointed one, and it's the Messiah. And also Nechash, which is the serpent, right? This is the serpent of Genesis, the serpent that tempts Eve. They're numerically equivalent, right? So that the serpent is the Messiah, which is absolutely a totally non-orthodox truth here, right? But yeah, I think is an important formula in our work. That the serpent, who brings knowledge to humanity, sort of is the Messiah, is the redemptive power. 3, 5, and 8 are Fibonacci numbers, and they're also key numbers in the geometry of the pentagram. We don't have time to get into that now, but just something to look out for if you ever investigate, some of the sacred geometry around the pentagram. Yeah, look for the numbers 3, 5, 8, and you can also look into the Fibonacci sequence and the golden mean that the Fibonacci sequence approaches, the ratio of the consecutive terms in the Fibonacci sequence. So anyways, expressive of harmony and again, the pentagram. And this is, again, something we'll see in 2 weeks again. Here's another number we'll see in a lot more detail in 2 weeks. 418 is the letter Heth spelled in full. It's also worth noting that 4 plus 1 plus 8 is 13, right? So 418 sort of reduces to the unity. And we'll spend a lot more time with abrahadabra in 2 weeks, which is an 11-lettered word that is the word of the aeon and the formula of the attainment of the great work, and perhaps Crowley's most important Kabbalistic innovation, the most important thing that he ever discovered in the Kabbalah was this number and the formula abrahadabra, and we'll do a lot more on that in 2 weeks. All right, yeah, last few numbers here. 441 is 21 squared, right? We saw 21 as a Heye, the name of Kether, all that. But 441 is the value of Ameth, or Emet, truth. Now, by Kabbalah of the 9 chambers, we can see that Emet, truth, equals humanity. And now, this is not just because they both, like, if you enumerate those both by Kabbalah of the 9 chambers, you get 9 in both cases. But that by itself isn't extremely important. But actually, each letter by Kabbalah of 9 chambers is identified, right? So both start with Aleph, which is 1, and now you have Mem, which is 40, but Kabbalah of the 9 chambers that would reduce to 4, and then Tav is 400, which again reduces to 4. And then the same thing with Adam. You have Aleph 1, Daleth 4, and then Mem, which reduces to 4. So in both, you have 1, 4, 4. So that it's not just the final values, but even each letter in Adam and Ameth are equated by the Kabbalah of 9 chambers, showing obviously, the nature of humanity as the truth, and truth as 21 squared, right? The Kether, the kind of extension of the power of the divine unity. And interesting, I'm also just noting, this is something that I don't remember if I read this or if I just noticed this myself. But 441 is 441 is a permutation of 414, 414, which is the value of Ein Sof Or, the limitless light, which I think is also an interesting thing to reflect on. All right, everybody's favorite number, 666. So 666 is another important number of the sun. And again, this will make more sense when we look at the magic squares. It's the sum of 1 to 6 squared and the sum of all the numbers in the magic square of the sun. And no coincidence, and again, we'll talk about this more later, it's the value of Sorath, who's the spirit of the sun. That's no coincidence there, the relation to the magic square in that value. 666 is 6 times 111. Now again, 111 is the value of Aleph, which is expressive of unity. So we can see 666 as like an extension or a development of the number 6, which is Tefereth and the sun. 666, and this is the second time we'll see Greek here today. 666 is the value of the Greek Tu Megatherion, right? The great beast from Revelation, which Crowley adopts as his motto as Magus. He identifies himself with the beast, and actually his mother had identified himself with the beast, had identified him with the beast from the time he was a child, right? So this is Crowley's kind of office as the prophet of the Aeon, is Tu Megatherion, the great beast of Revelation, which he, as some of you I'm sure know this story. That he said, during that court case, where they were asking him about, why have you identified with yourself as the beast 666? And he says, well, it's just a number of the sun, and you can call me Little Sunshine. All right, just 2 more numbers here, and then we'll be done. All right, 671. So Adonai, as we discussed before, Adonai spelled in full is 671, right? So spelling out each letter name in full, and then adding all those together, you get 671. Now the Om, using the final values, that would be 671, right? Because here we would have Mem as 600, plus Ayin 70, plus Aleph 1, 671. A bunch of interesting things here. It's the value of Tera'ah, which is gate. This is also the name of the AA neophyte ritual. So obviously I'm not going to be able to say anything about that, but it's clearly a very important ritual. And if you know anything about that ritual, it definitely connects to the number 671. If you're not an AA initiate, you can also look at Liber Pyramidos, which is Crowley's adaptation of the AA neophyte ritual for like solo individual use, and that's openly published. So you can check out Liber Pyramidos for some more about this number and why that's significant, for the formula of the neophyte initiation. Now, if you rearrange the letters that spell Torah gate, you get Torah, which means law. And so understanding those letters as T-O-R-A, you can also do permutations of those letters, which is rota, wheel, and tarot, the tarot. And actually in the Smith-Waite deck, better known as the Rider-Waite deck, but I always feel it's such a, I don't know, Pamela Coleman-Smith deserves, I think, more credit than anyone else for the existence and popularity of that deck. It's really her art, and I don't know, kind of offended by the fact that her name gets left off of the name of the deck. But anyways, so you can see that they've incorporated that symbolism like right into the card of the Wheel of Fortune. So we can read, obviously you've got the Tetragrammaton here too, Yod, He, Vav, He, but just looking at the T-O-R-A, right? So reading it this way, you get Torah. Reading this way, you get tarot. And then, reading from the bottom around, you get rota, wheel. So we have tarot, wheel, law, right, expressing the idea of the Adonai, the divine, the holy guardian angel, the higher self, and all, as the path, as the law, as the wheel of existence, and also expressed, by the tarot, by those 78 symbols there. And again, relating to totality and all that. And there's a lot of other really interesting stuff at 671, but that's just a few of the basics. All right, last number we're going to look at here. Well, second to last. We have 777. So 777 is a couple of interesting things. It's the value of the sum total of the paths on the lightning flash. Counting Binah to Hesed as Gimel, right? So from Kether to Hokmah, that's Aleph 1. Hokmah to Binah, that's Daleth 4. Now, Binah to Hesed, that's not a path, but we're going to enumerate it as Gimel, right? Gimel leads from Kether to Tefereth. So we're using that as a kind of stand-in for the non-existent path there. And then just continuing that pattern all the way down from Teth to Lamed, to Nun, to Pei, to Resh, and then finally Tav, right? So that the path that the lightning flash takes, the instantaneous creation of the Sephiroth, all those paths together sum to 777. It's also the value of another one of these kind of composite divine names here, Had, Ruach, Elohim, Chaim, which Crowley interprets as one is the spirit of the Elohim of lives. The God of life, the unity of the spirit of that. In the Elohim is a really interesting word all in itself. And actually, we'll talk about that in 2 weeks, the name Elohim, expressive of the creative divine powers. And then it also is the value of Olam HaKalipoth, right? The world of the shells. And so, you can look into it. 777, Crowley discusses this fact and why he chose 777 because of this, because it expresses two very different and opposite things, which in a way is the kind of truth about duality and the unification of opposites, and all those ideas, the coincidentia oppositorum. But it also, I think, expresses, and Crowley uses it this way, as about this art of analyzing numbers. On the one hand, we can approach the divine unity and all these important deep esoteric truths through this study, but at the same time it's also kind of just like juggling a bunch of symbols, and it's just like the ordinary mind or the intellect just churning out more and more information, which is like the shells, right? There's something kind of empty about all of this, at the same time that it's also an investigation into divine truth. So in this very practice of the literal Qabalah, we have at once a kind of the empty, hollow symbols and the divine truth. All right, and then finally, we started with 0, and so we'll end with infinity. And I've just got a few. The actual mathematics of infinity are really interesting and worth looking into. That's been an important development beginning of the 19th century with like Cantor's work, and an important part of modern mathematics. And the infinite is also a really important concept in Thelema. So I think this is all the verses from the Book of the Law that contain the word infinite or infinity. So we'll just read them here as a conclusion. Every number is infinite. There is no difference. And Crowley really makes a lot out of this verse and about how the idea that every number is infinite, that each number is not just kind of what it is mathematically, or not just like 3 or 2 isn't just like the next number after 1, and 3 isn't just a number after 2, but each number is actually an individual in itself that has its own truths and everything. They're not just like composites of the other numbers, but each number is actually infinite in the sense of being its own sort of individual and its own being with its own secrets and truths. Next one here. Now you shall know that the chosen priest and apostle of infinite space is the prince priest, the beast, and in his woman called the scarlet woman is all power given. They shall gather my children into their fold. They shall bring the glory of the stars into the hearts of men. Next one here. Since I am infinite space and the infinite stars thereof, do ye also thus. Bind nothing. Let there be no difference made among you between any one thing and any other thing, for thereby there cometh hurt. It's interesting, we have the phrase no difference appearing here, as well as in the first verse there is no difference. Something to reflect on. And then finally, the only one from outside of chapter 1. In chapter 2, we read, also reason is a lie, for there is a factor infinite and unknown, and all their words are skew-wise. So you can check out Crowley's commentaries for more on that. But the idea of a factor infinite and unknown, right? If you have an multiplying or doing any kind of mathematics with infinity, it kind of cancels out or negates anything else that you're doing, in the sense that, like 1 plus infinity is still just infinity. A million times infinity is still just infinity, right? There's a sense that relative to infinity, everything is the same in some sense, at least to a certain extent. I mean, there's other mathematical operations that do actually transform different orders of infinity into each other and things like that. But again, just this idea of the infinite. Yeah, and something to reflect on in your own, your own work. All right, finally, just a few words on studying and researching numbers. Just keep a notebook. When you're first starting out, just take a notebook and just use it. Just record your own researches, your own experiments, your own thoughts about these numbers. And then at some point, this doesn't have to be from the very beginning, but at some point, creating actually your own version of Sefer Sephiroth, a notebook that you can add to and everything, with different pages for the different numbers and things like that. And really organizing it into your own reference is a great long-term project. Though when you're just starting out, I think just keeping a notebook, just keeping a written record of your experiments and your thoughts and your reflections, or just things that jump out to you, right? So a lot of the stuff in Sefer Sephiroth probably won't be particularly meaningful to you, but if a part of it is, either because of, like something we've said here, or other things used in like Crowley or in Thelemic writings or in the Golden Dawn, record that in your notebook. Or if you find your own numbers, your own words that add up to numbers that are already known, record that in your own notebook, and you're starting to build your own dictionary, your own library and record of numbers that are important to you and for your work and your path. Because ultimately, as Crowley says, my Kabbalah is not your Kabbalah. Although there's a huge shared ground, in all this sort of stuff, we all have to find the formulas that express our own great work. Second, just practice the techniques. Just take numbers, either numbers that I've gone through here, other numbers that you might find in some of Crowley's works or the Golden Dawn text, and just play with them. Sit down and work them out and figure them out and do it yourself, by hand, or just take other numbers. You could choose them randomly. You could open up to a random page 777 or Sefer Sephiroth, or just any other number that seems appealing to you. Look it up in Sefer Sephiroth, see what it comes out to. Find its factors, add up the numbers together. Just start playing with this stuff and investigating it. I think actually doing it is going to be the way that you're going to learn this, rather than by you have to read texts or attend classes, but it's the actual practice of doing it that's going to be most important in the end. Third thing here, just be receptive to numbers showing up in life, or other symbols that can be related to numbers, just throughout your daily experience. Be skeptical also in every number you see. Well, on some level, everything that you ever encounter is a message from the divine, but not always in exactly the same way, right? So we don't want to sort of you can really kind of go off the rails by thinking that, you know, every license plate you see in front of you on the freeway is some sort of special message about your special, you know, role as the Messiah, you know, or something like that, right? So, you know, do it, but also, you know, remain sort of skeptical about it. There's a kind of nice sort of principle of like a rule of three or something like that. If something occurs once, you know, that's interesting and worth paying attention to, but don't make too much out of it. If something occurs twice, then really pay attention. And if something occurs 3 times, then it's really important and is definitely happening. Again, that's not like a hard and fast rule, but I just think that principle of looking for confirmation in things. And again, analyzing things. If there's a number that you kind of keep encountering, look it up in Sefer Sephiroth, you know, work out the symbolism of it and see what you can find. And again, keeping a notebook is so important. I've definitely had the experience of finding a number and then not really quite figuring it out or not really getting much out of it, but then much later finding another number that explained something that I saw much earlier. So that's another reason to keep a record. And the better organized your records are, the better. Though I'm not one to talk there. I just got hundreds of pages of Kabbalistic notes that need to be kind of reorganized and sorted. But yeah, there you go. And then finally, you know, just experiment and play. You know, this can be kind of a fun thing. There's no need to get stressed out about it. And, you know, you're going to find sort of 95% of all the Kabbalistic work you do is not going to really result in anything at all. But it's the practice of doing that's going to get better at it. And you never know what, you know, something you kind of half worked out a year ago might end up being really important. And again, you know, you just have to do it to find things. And, you know, taking a kind of light, playful attitude, I think will, you know, keep you from getting attached to things or overly like bogged down or misled by all this like intellectual activity, but leaving open the space for you know, something else to emerge through that intellectual activity. And that's a theme we'll come back to in the final class in this series. So yeah, I know we're like 25 minutes over, but you know, thanks for your patience, and I'm really glad we didn't try to do magic squares today as well. Here's some, for more about our work, as always, you can visit tots.org, especially tots.org/FAQ. If you want to get in touch with me, you're welcome to email me at theprovost@tots.org. And as always, for any non-members, anyone who's not a member of either academic or our initiatory track, we do a $5 suggested donation. And if you'd like to so donate, you can send it to PayPal through PayPal to payments@tots.org. So yeah, thanks everybody, and of course, you know, I'll make the slides available in all the usual places for your reference. And again, I hope that wasn't too overwhelming. So there's a basic introduction to some of these numbers, and also just some demonstrations of how the principles, you know, the techniques that we saw 2 weeks ago are actually used in practice. So today we were focusing on number, and then 2 weeks from now we'll focus on using these techniques to analyze words. And you know, of course, there's a lot of overlap, slightly arbitrary division, but I thought it was a nice way to organize this material. So yeah, 2 weeks from now, be very much the same thing. We'll just go through a series of words and formulae and analyze them. So yeah, thanks everybody. For everybody watching on YouTube, you know, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to our channel for more. And yeah, we'll see you all in 2 weeks. So thanks everybody. 93.